What's up, mother truckers? Happy end of 2019. Shredlord here with the Thralls of Metal. Here to bring you my year-end top 10 favorite albums of 2019. Now, I made a list of 10, but I also added 2 honorable mentions that I'd like to share before I kick off this list. First, honorable mention, Candlemas, The Door to Doom. I thought this was a really great Doom album, but what really set it off for me was the Tony Iommi solo. Tony Iommi, if anyone knows me, is one of my biggest guitar heroes. He's the Lord of the Riff, the Master of Metal. Every great riff he wrote already, we're all just secretly taking little pieces of what he's done in the past and trying to make it our own. So this is a great Doom album unto itself, but the fact they brought in Tony Iommi to throw a guest solo on here, I really enjoyed that. I thought it was really cool that he did that in the first place, so threw this in as an honorable mention. Next would be Nile's I can never get this right, Nilotic Rites. Nile is a really cool band. They've never been one of my favorite metal bands. I never really listened to a lot of them. I've definitely listened to them over the years. But upon reviewing this album with the rest of the guys, I thought this was a really cool and really strong album for them. And I think it's one of the best of their catalog, actually. And so for that reason, I gave it one of my honorable mentions. All right, let's get into the top 10. First and foremost, this album came to me kind of late thanks to Necrotic. He turned me on to this album not too long ago, but I enjoyed it so much that I went and listened to the rest of the album, and I kind of adored it. So even though it made it late to my ears, it still made it to my top 10, and that would be Decapitation's Death Atlas. Necrotic turned me on to the track Death Atlas, the final track, and it was awesome. It had great riffs, but then it would have slowdown parts. It was a great mixture of a lot of different sounds and soundscapes. The vocalist does a lot of really unique things that I don't hear a lot of other vocalists do. And the part that really sold me and made me fall in love with the album is at the end there's this kind of soft singing part that reminds me of a mixture of David Bowie and Peter Steele. And I adore both of those guys, and so for that reason, it immediately drew me in, and I knew I had to listen to the rest of the album. So, there it is, number 10. Next is number 9, Possessed, Revelations of Oblivion. This was a long time coming in the making. Possessed has they have a history. It's not really cool because the lead singer's, obviously paralyzed if you know anything about the band. But I thought this was a really kick-ass death metal album that had a lot of great old-school death metal elements, but with a little bit of a modern touch. And this thing, I didn't know what to expect because I don't think a lot of people listened to Possessed in a long time, so we were all kind of eagerly awaiting, and it did not disappoint me at all. Once again, I thought the riffs were heavy, the vocals were good leads on it. It was a very good death metal album, and it was good to see Possessed back doing what they do best, making metal. Next, number 8, Death Angel's Humanicide. Death Angel is a really cool band. I've always dug them. I've never been a huge follower, but anytime I listened to them, I definitely enjoyed them. When I listened to this album, I thought it was incredibly badass. It's a great thrash album. I thought the riffs were not uncreative. They got very creative. They didn't just fall on their laurels. They kind of pushed themselves to write some really cool stuff, some very dynamic stuff. I personally love thrash. It's one of my favorite genres, so it immediately clicked with me. Also, I'm not going to say his last name because I slaughter it every fucking time I try it. But Mark, the lead singer of Death Angel, in my opinion, is a really underrated vocalist. He kind of has a more polished Tom Araya to his voice. This album is badass, and like any of these albums, if you haven't heard it, you got to do it. Number 7, Spirit Adrift, Divided by Darkness. I'm a late fan to this band. Once again, it's surprise, another band that Necrotic turned me on to. But when I really dug into the band and learned a little bit more about them, I kind of grew to love them even more. One thing I found out is that they're giant Thin Lizzy fans, and they worship Phil Lynott, which I also love Thin Lizzy and all that classic rock from the 70s. Thin Lizzy and Phil Lynott were incredible musicians, great band. The other thing I love about this album and Spirit Adrift is they're not afraid to experiment. They combine all sorts of different styles and genres to create one big package of awesome music, and this album totally blew me away with that combination. Number 6, Devin Townsend's Empath. I first heard about Devin Townsend as a guitar player when I was a kid. I worshiped Steve Vai. Steve Vai is one of the most creative. He's kind of like a wizard. He's very non-traditional guitar player, very unique, very out of the box. But he put out an album called Sex and Religion, which Devin Townsend was the vocalist on. And when I heard him do the vocals on it, he did traditional vocals singing their songs like, I believe the single on Sex and Religion for that was In My Dreams. Which is basically Devin Townsend singing about his masturbatory fantasies, which as a young kid, you're like, ah, I liked it. You know, it was funny. He was talking about beating off. So it totally had my attention as a young, immature kid, even though I'm still an older, immature man. So, but anyway, then there's other tracks on there. It's called Touching Tongues. It's an instrumental track, but Devin actually does a vocal solo in it. And I knew right then and there that he was kind of a really weird, unique, cool kind of a vocalist. And then when he left Vai's band, you know, he did Strapping Young Lad and the Devin Townsend Project, and he just continued to grow and grow as a really unique, awesome metal musician. And Empath is no different. Empath brings a lot of the Devin Townsend things, which means influences from 800 different places, but he always does a really great job of bringing it all together and making it his. Empath is no different. The track Genesis is very weird. I remember watching the video and seeing the whole Jungle Book scene, or, you know, like the Lion King kind of the end where they're showing all the animals on the mountains and shit. But overall, I thought it was a really cool album, really unique. I did not hear any album this year that sounded anything close to this, and I was really happy with the way this turned out. I know, in a lot of the pre-release talk about this album, Devin seemed a little worried about how everyone would perceive this, because I think he put a lot of his heart and his soul into this, and he knows that he got even weirder than he normally gets at times, but I think it worked out well for him, and I think he put out a great album. All right, ladies and germs, we're halfway through. Let's kick it off. Number 5, Dream Theater's Distance Over Time. I have been a gigantic Dream Theater fan since I first had Awake on cassette tape. John Petrucci's guitar playing and John Petrucci's tone and everything has always had a big impact on me. I've always worshipped at the altar of John and anything he's done. With that being said, I was very disappointed in the last Dream Theater album. I did not like the whole Dream Theater goes Disney musical bullshit. It really let me down. But, you know, every band has a stinker. Every band has albums that you don't like in their catalog. That's life. Tough shit. But when they decided to come out with this album, you know, you're always wondering, what's it going to be? Is it going to be Disney the Musical Take 2? No. Thank God. I think they kind of subtly got the message that the fans weren't necessarily crazy about the last Dream Theater album. Some people liked it, and if you do, hey, that's cool. I personally didn't. But they went more back to, you know, good riffs, you know, heavy riffs, good changes, cool time changes, great solos, just had a darker, a little bit heavier feel, definitely darker and heavier than the last album to me. And so, to me, that was a step back in the right direction for Dream Theater. Number 4, Opeth in Cauda Venenum. Now, if you know me personally, you know that as a musician, Mike Ockerfeldt is one of my biggest inspirations. I first heard My Arms, Your Hearse through one of my best friends and other guitarist in my band, Will. And the moment he showed me Opeth, I immediately fell in love and became obsessed with them. They had a sound that I just wanted to absorb and learn and try to recreate. I was so fascinated with everything. And then when I learned more about the band and I found out that Michael sang and Michael growled and Michael wrote all the riffs, and then he played, you know, in the beginning it was Peter Lindgren and Mike Ockerfeldt. And I loved Peter, and Peter and Mike would both do leads. So this guy was like a triple threat. He'd write all the lyrics, so a quadruple threat. And immediately he became just this idol that I continue to worship to this day. Even though, once again, every band puts out some stinkers or some albums that you don't like, but I've never wavered on my love for Mike Ockerfeldt or Opeth because I always have the earlier albums to go back to. But going to this album, if you listen to Sorceress and Pale Communion and Heritage, you know how different and how astray things have gone since Watershed. So while I don't believe that this is full-on Opeth going back to metal again, I feel like they incorporated some more of the metal and some more of the heavier riffs. if you know anything about Opeth, even in the earlier Opeths when they were heavier, there's always been prog in Opeth. Even if you don't necessarily hear it, it pops out. If you study that music and dissect it, you'll always hear prog influences. You're never going to pull the prog influences out of Mike Ockerfeldt. But he still loves metal too. I thought that this was a really great combination of the two, and I hope in the future that maybe we can get one or two more metal albums. If I could get another Deliverance, or if I could get another My Arms Your Hearse, or if I can get another Blackwater Park, I'd be in heaven. But I thought this was a good step in the right direction, and I really, really, really enjoyed listening to this album. I probably listened to it about 5 times in a row when it first came out. Number 3, Mayhem's Daemon. I've been a big Mayhem fan. Them and Immortal are kind of the bands that got me into black metal. The whole story behind Mayhem is, of course, very interesting, very brutal, very dark. But in between The Mysteries of Satan, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, I'm not good. But in between that album, to me, there wasn't a lot of great memorable albums in between. So when they said they were going to release a new album, I didn't quite know what to expect. But I remember being at work and having my headphones in and just listening to this album for the first time and immediately going to my phone and texting Nilotic saying how geeked I was about how excellent this album sounded. It sounds just pure fucking evil. It is evil as shit. It is heavy, it is dark, and the great thing I like about the vocalist is not only did he do vocals, but he used his voice as like a musical instrument as well to create layers, to create textures. He did it in a very non-traditional way. I know he's operatic trained, so he is a very good vocalist, and I think his creativity brought a unique flavor on top of the already evil, badass music that's on this album. Also, we get a couple solos that are tasty as fuck. Ghoul, the guitar player, put, I believe, 2 or 3. I think there's 2 total, maybe 3. But they're not that long, but they're awesome. They're nice and technical, and they are tasty as fuck. So this album was a home run to me. Once again, I didn't know what to expect when it was getting ready to come out, but I knew I was going to listen to it. And when I listened to it, I was beyond pleasantly surprised. Number 2, Abbath Outstrider. Once again, if you know me, Abbath is like my spirit animal. I'm just this goofy-ass stoner kid that likes to play metal and have fun and be a goof-ass. I loved Immortal, and when Abbath went solo, I knew I was going to listen to what he had to offer and see if I liked it or not, and I did. The first album was really cool. So I was looking forward to Outstrider when it came time to be released. The first couple tracks they released as singles, I was like, yeah, this is really cool. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on the album. So all the way through, I thought this album was incredible. It has moments of just like kick-ass rock and roll vibes in it, as well as combining good black metal. Once again, some leads on it. I know Abbath can be kind of a crazy bastard. I'm sure we've all heard the story recently about how he was pissed drunk, starting fights within his own band, and then the next day he's sending it off to rehab. So, that crazy rock and roll lifestyle will take its toll on you, but here's to hoping Abbath can pull his shit together and keep writing great albums, because if this is an indication of where he's going to keep going, then he needs to pull his head out of his ass, get his shit together, and keep writing great albums like this, because this is fucking killer. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, my number 1 album of 2019. Allegaeon Apoptosis. I can never say that right. I'm not a good speaker of words. From the moment I heard the intro, it had this killer bass sound. And immediately my brain was drawn to, there is an earlier album from years ago. I don't like Job for a Cowboy. I've never liked Job for a Cowboy, despite other Thralls being fans of them previously and showing me them. However, long ago, Jam and John showed me an album called Sun Eater, which is beyond fucking disgusting. If you've never heard Sun Eater by Job for a Cowboy, you're doing yourself a disservice by not listening to it. But it has this incredible bass tone on it, and I thought the intro of this album had a very similar tone, so immediately, just between that correlation, I was drawn in. Now, this album, from front to back, is loaded with incredible riffs, incredible melodies, great moments of heaviness, and the one thing being a guitarist myself is there is stupid fucking awesome lead after stupid fucking awesome lead. And what's cool about these guys is sometimes in bands you have like a kind of a traditional style. Like if you're in a thrash band, like in a basic kind of thrash band, you kind of have that similar style that you go for as far as the guitar playing goes, and as far as your guitar solos go. You know, you're kind of heavy into the blues scale or to the pentatonic scale. Throw on a wah, and you're in business, and that's great. That's cool. It definitely has a place. It's awesome. But what makes these guys special, and what made this album special to me, is that I love a lot of old 70s fusion. Guys like Al Di Meola, Frank Gambale, Alan Holdsworth, those guys were guitar players from back in the day that were fucking monster players that nobody knew about because they played music that wasn't famous in the pop culture. But I can tell that these guys studied, very sophisticated. They're very sound on their theory. They're very modal. They don't just stick with, you know, your pentatonic or a straight major or straight minor. It's very fusiony. Once again, kind of like one of the reasons I adore Cynic. Paul Masvidal is very modal and very creative and very Alan Holdsworthy. So all these leads were just sophisticated, beautiful, and very non-traditional compared to some of your standard metal albums. And from front to back, it had me captivated. The other thing I'll say about this album is that the vocalist, my first introduction to this band was hearing them cover Rush's Subdivisions. I'm also a big 70s prog rock guy. I love Rush, Genesis, King Crimson, Camel, Pink Floyd, stuff like that. They covered Rush's Subdivisions, and they fucking killed it. They made it their own, but they did it in such a way that me as a listener still could appreciate the fact that it was a cover, but appreciate the fact that they made some heavier changes, added a solo with some sweeps, which I thought was cool. They didn't overdo it, right? They didn't destroy the song by trying to cover it. So immediately I had to listen to more of these guys. That vocalist is fucking gross. He's a great growler, a great screamer, and he's got great clean vocals. There's a couple spots on the album where he lets those clean vocals show, and my only complaint is I'd like to hear maybe more of him on the next album. You know, he's very talented in that regard, so maybe we can get a little bit more variety on the next one. Well, ladies and germs, that is my top 10 album of 2019. I look forward to what 2020 brings. Hopefully a lot of great metal. I know Sodom is going to release an album soon. I know Carcass is going to release an album soon. I just heard a rumor in the rumor mill that Iron Maiden just finished an album, so hopefully I have a lot of these albums to talk about next year and review. Alright, motherfuckers, enjoy the rest of the year, and I'll catch you next year.